And I'm very proud to introduce Brian Perry, who will be presenting exactly what you see on the screen, Scope in CSS with and without JavaScript. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Dwayne. Yes, very excited to present this at my local camp that is now in my home office. So there's that bit.ly link there that has a link to slides and resources. It's also linked on the session node, and there's a PDF of the slides there too. So if you're a follow along kind of person or just want to check it out later, it is there for you. And let's see here. Okay. All right, good. All right, so yeah, probably the first thing to see is how's everybody doing? It's been a wild weeks, year, who knows? Yeah, just in general, really excited and happy that we're able to take this virtual and get together and share ideas. And you know, it just makes me really happy to be part of a community like this during such a crazy time. And also, you know, a big hat tip to all the other organizers who have done some incredible things to make this happen this week. And I am Brian Perry. I'm a lead front-end developer at Bounteous. I live out in the Chicago suburbs in Palatine. And I'm a lover of all things component-driven, so building with the components in Drupal, design systems and tools like Pattern Lab and Storybook, and then also increasingly building with component-based JavaScript frameworks like React. And then also a lover of all things Nintendo. Dan gets his more video game references here. So, you know, happy to chat in Slack about the cool stuff you're playing on Switch. Me, I am incredibly excited for the new Animal Crossing game that comes out tomorrow. Oh boy, am I excited. And then I'm on the internet in a variety of places and would love to internet with you, especially given this virtual conference. So, you know, hopefully there'll be time for questions, but if you want to track me down in Slack or on Twitter or whatever to continue the conversation, I'd love it. So as I mentioned, I work for a company called Bounteous. We have offices throughout North America, but a couple in the Chicago area, although obviously everyone is at their own homes right now. Drupal is one of a handful of things that we do, but I work primarily within our Drupal practice and get to work with a great team of folks and learn so much from them on a day-to-day basis. We are often hiring. I'm not sure if we are literally right now, but you know, in the future, keep us in mind, get in touch if you'd like to do great Drupal work. And also if you're looking to have great Drupal work done, get in touch as well. But let's dive into what we are here to talk about. CSS has global scope. So the CSS that you write is in a global namespace. So those rules will apply by default globally, which is a really great thing if you want those rules to apply globally. If you want to write a small amount of code that applies to a lot of your application, it's great. But it's also not so great when that isn't what you want. I'll let people catch up and read this. But yeah, I'm sure anybody who has written, you know, any amount of meaningful CSS has experienced this, where they a change that they make has some unintended consequence. And part of that is related to the fact that CSS by nature is global. And at the same time, there are new approaches using of writing CSS within JavaScript. And a lot of those solutions offer something called component scope. So that's the idea that the CSS you write is only going to apply to that component and won't leak elsewhere and won't affect other things on your page. And as you might imagine, there are differences in opinion about that particular approach and what's the right way to go. And people argue about it on the internet because of course they do. But my take is that, you know, kind of each of those approaches have some advantages, and it would be great to use them together. So I think we should have both, just like this meme says. So that is my talk. I Dwayne, I don't know, how are we doing on time? I feel like that might have been a little short.
Maybe a little short.
Okay. All right. Yeah, maybe it's the virtual part of this just throwing me off a little bit. Okay. I guess I can maybe just like start from the beginning and dive in a little bit deeper. Let's do that. So this is scope in CSS with and without JavaScript. And CSS has global scope. So let's look at a little bit about what that actually means. So this is just a little code pen that looks at inheritance in CSS. So I'll jump over here. I'm assuming everybody still sees my browser window. If not, somebody yell. But yeah, little simple code pen that looks at the concept of inherited properties in CSS. So we just have an H1 and a paragraph tag here, and we're creating a rule on the HTML element that sets the font family to the one true font, Comic Sans. And the font family rule in this case is inherited by children. So that's what allows Comic Sans to be applied to the H1 and the paragraph. So that's great if we want these rules to apply globally. If that wasn't the case, we would have a situation where, we'd have to write, comment that out, that works. We'd have to write like individual rules. So we'd have to target the paragraph. So we have the paragraph with an H1, sorry, with the Comic Sans, and then we'd have to also have our H1 to get that to apply in both cases. And, it'd be really cumbersome to, we'd have to write really complex selectors or, a lot of duplicate code to be able to achieve the same effect if inheritance wasn't a thing. So that, that's potentially one of the superpowers of CSS in this case. And then we can talk a little bit more about how different CSS rules are combined and applied. So there's the concept of the cascade, which is the C in CSS. And part of this is the idea that style sheets can have 3 different origins: author, user, and system. And how they're applied is the cascade. So this image is the definitive guide to CSS styling order, which is very easy and simple to consume and always remember. Obviously, being sarcastic there, this is from a CSS tricks post, this image. A lot of good information there, but it definitely does get at the fact that it can be complicated to understand how your CSS will be inherited, how it will apply, how the cascade is going to be combined. So the best thing that I have found as a way to explain the cascade is actually just the W3C spec still. So just going through that at a high level. So you'll find all declarations that apply to the element and property for the particular media type. And then at that point, things are sorted according to importance and origin. So we already talked about the origins. So first it's the user agent declarations, then user normal, and then author normal, so the stuff that you write in your CSS code, and then author important, so anything that you stick an important on will win on top of that. But then at the very end, user important declarations went out over that. And then anything that has the same origin and importance will be sorted by specificity, which we'll talk about in a second. And if all else fails, it's just the order that the rules are specified. But again, that's pretty powerful in that having these multiple origins gives some interesting control. So we can write in our CSS that we think that a page should look like this, and it should be represented like this. But at the end of the day, a user has the ability to say, I appreciate that you want your page to look like this, but for me to be able to consume this, the font needs to be bigger, for example. And at the end of the day, they can dictate that that needs to be the case, which is great. And then specificity. So a fun way I found to look at specificity is from Star Wars. So CSS specificity wars in this case. So for our stormtrooper, that's the element selector. which is not very specific. And then the class selector attribute or pseudo class is slightly more specific than that. And then the ID selector is even more specific. And then kind of at the top, the emperor here is the style attribute. So like an inline style will win out. And then worth noting that the universal selector or things that are inherited essentially have no specificity. So there's obviously a lot more to specificity than we'll go into right now. But you know, there's a lot of different ways that different selectors can be combined together. You can give them point values so you can figure out what the overall specificity will be. And again, this CSS specificity wars is a really great way to explore that. And also you can use the Death Star of important at the end of the day if you need to. So those are kind of the ways that global CSS can be combined together. CSS-in-JS, on the other hand, can provide a component scope and some other advantages. So let's talk a little bit about why someone would write CSS within their JavaScript. So we talked already a little bit about the idea of component scope. So that's the idea that the styles you're writing are just going to apply to that component and won't leak out and affect other things. But then there's also the idea that you're co-locating your styles with your components. So everything's packaged up together. So it can be nice from a developer experience perspective, potentially, to have your CSS right there with some of your logic. It's also potentially an advantage for components that are distributed or otherwise composable, because you know that everything that you need to render that thing is all in one place. And then using bundlers like Webpack, there's some potential advantages there because it can do static analysis on your code and actually determine what CSS is going to be used and what CSS will never be used, and can actually eliminate that stuff from the bundle. And then because these styles aren't going to leak out, it potentially takes some of the pressure off from a naming convention perspective. You don't have to use class naming to control specificity as much or control the cascade. And then also there's the idea that using some of these approaches, you can have the props that are passed into a component. So something that the component knows about itself to affect styling, rather than having to juggle class names and update things in the DOM, like you might have to do with like a jQuery approach. And then also there are definitely some cases where it might be fear and lack of knowledge of CSS that's leading people to this approach too. But not all cases. So why wouldn't one use CSS-in-JS? So you still have to know how CSS works, even stuff that's hard. It comes with, in many cases, I believe not all, there's some kind of new approaches there, but comes with a bundle size or performance cost. There's essentially a runtime that ends up part of your bundle to allow you to do this. It's also a barrier of entry. So somebody who is really comfortable writing CSS may not be really comfortable writing JavaScript, and this might get in the way of them being able to make their awesome CSS. And it is, at the end of the day, an additional layer of abstraction. So some of the approaches here use a more JavaScript object-like syntax rather than just writing regular CSS. That can pose some problems with syntax highlighting, although there are solutions around that. And then also in general, knowing that everything is scoped within this component can potentially get you in the mindset where you focus too much on that individual component and introduces potential for inconsistency or one-offs where there could be opportunities for reuse. So obviously the question is, which approach is right? And again, with our meme friend here from the taco commercial, why can't we have both? Why can't we have that level of control over global rules and component scope rules? I think it would be amazing if CSS allowed that. So that is my talk. Looking at my watch though, I think we are still pretty short. I did not know how much this virtual approach was going to affect my ability to perceive. Maybe it's actually just the past week. I don't really understand how to perceive time anymore. Okay, so I guess we will just maybe start from the beginning again and dive a little bit deeper. So this is scope in CSS with and without JavaScript. And CSS has global scope. So we talked about the Cascade, we talked about specificity and inheritance, which obviously is represented by mourners fighting over a house. And while that is powerful, it's also can be tricky in some cases, understanding how everything comes together. So we should get our act together. In comes CSS methodologies is a way to help with this. So this is the idea of a particular approach to organizing or naming your CSS. So popular methodologies are object-oriented CSS. Very popular in the Drupal community is BEM, which stands for Block Element Modifier. There's also SMACS, Scalable and Modular Architecture for CSS. That's a tough one to say, which is also used in core, I believe, as far as the file structure. And this can give you something that feels like component scope at the end of the day. But again, because CSS by its nature is global, it's not really that. So I wouldn't be surprised if a handful of people that are watching are already familiar with BEM. But just to kind of look at it at a high level for those who might not be familiar with it, I found a post, BEM for everyone else, that uses the concept of an emoji to describe what BEM is and how it works. And I just created a little code pen that kind of illustrates that. So we'll just take a quick look over there. Let's see. All right, made sure there were no crazy comments in the chat. Just laughs and goofs. All right, so here's the code pen. So we have just a div here with a class of face. So that's the block, the kind of parent level container here. And it just gives us a yellow circle, the face itself. So if we wanted to add some elements, let's say that we want to add eyes, we can create a div and give it a class. And the convention here for BEM is that it is the block, face, and then 2 underscores, and then the name of the element. So the element is kind of like a subcomponent inside of the face. So we're just going to say eyes. And then at that point, we have eyes. And then we'll also give the emoji a mouth. So we can do face underscore mouth. And yeah, we have a mouth. And now there's the M in BEM, the concept of a modifier. So we see that we have a face with eyes and a mouth, but they're in their default state. So a modifier lets us change the presentation of those things. So the convention for that is you'll still have your default class of face eyes in this case. But if we wanted to open our eyes, we'll also go face, eyes, and then it's 2 dashes, and then the name of the modifier. So open, face eyes open, we'll open our emoji's eyes, and then face, eyes, face mouth open. We'll open our emoji's mouth. So he's nice and shocked now. So that's kind of the high level on block element modifier. There's obviously a number of different ways that these things can be combined together. For example, we can also at the block level have a modifier. So we can do face, devil, and we have a red emoji with his open eyes and mouth. But yeah, that's the basic idea and the basic structure. So I think BEM is great. And I know a number of others in the Drupal community also agree, or at least use it and stay silent about their opinions about it. But I love that it gives a nice, understandable structure in our markup and our files. It makes it really easy to scaffold out a component. So we can, based on the BEM structure of that thing, we can just write out some markup and containing divs. and then we can have the same classes in Sass partial, and then start coloring it in from there. And it gives nice component-focused classes that are less likely to conflict with other things due to those naming conventions. So it feels like component scope, but then again, at the end of the day, it actually isn't. But yeah, as I mentioned, it's not truly scoped to the component. It's not enforced at the tooling level like some of the CSS and JS options would be. One exception, though, is if you're linting your Sass. There are ways that you can enforce BEM naming conventions, so that's nice and will probably help a little bit. But it also requires some discipline across the dev team. Everybody needs to agree that they're writing using BEM. Everybody needs to do it. Nobody can cheat, that sort of stuff. And naming can still be challenging, even though there's this general framework of how you're going to name your classes, especially when things start to nest and components start to get complicated. There have still been times when I've thought a lot about the right way to name something using BEM conventions. And CSS and JS can provide component scope. So let's look at exactly what that means a little bit. So the first thing we'll look at is the CSS and JS playground. If you haven't actually been hands-on with any of these CSS and JS options, this is a great place to start. And we'll look at this example here. So we'll look at styled components, which is a library commonly used with React. But also you can pick from a whole bunch of other options here if you want to try out other libraries, other syntaxes, stuff like that. But we'll look at the form here. It's a little squished on my screen, but so first in our component JavaScript here for the form, we're importing styled from styled components. And then once we do that, we'll take a look at the button here. That allows us to create a constant in this case for our button component. And then we can say it is a style.button. So that's just the, the button element. And then there's this backtick here. We open a backtick, and what that is a tag template literal in JavaScript. And that allows us to write our CSS code within those backticks. And the tag template literal also allows us to use things like JavaScript variables within that string, which we'll see an example of in a second. But yeah, basically you're creating a constant that has all of your styles. You can still use Sass-like nesting in there. So that gives us our submit button that looks like this. Well, it gives us the default button state. And then I talked about previously the idea of, with this approach, being able to respond to the props that are passed into a component. So there's a really simple example of that here. For our submit button, we're looking at the disabled prop. And if a button is disabled, it's going to use one background color. And if it's not disabled, it's going to use a different background color. So we don't have to change anything in the DOM. We don't have to give it a different class name for that. It just knows something about itself and can adjust its style. So for example, if I fill out this form and put what's kind of like a phone number in there, you see the submit button changes to that bluish color, which is pretty cool. And then also if we inspect here, just to give you a little bit of an idea of how the component scope actually happens. I mentioned that there's a runtime for a lot of these CSS and JS solutions. And what's actually happening, if you look at the markup, is it's giving these kind of gobbledygook unique class names for each of these instances of the styled components. And that's what prevents anything from colliding, because unless you're doing something really crazy, there's no way that you're going to use that same combination of class names somewhere else. So that is an example with styled components. Let's look at another area of the JavaScript ecosystem. Let's look at a similar example in the JavaScript framework Vue. And Vue does some interesting stuff here as well. So Vue has a concept of single file components. There's a few other ways that you can manage styles in Vue. But one of the things that makes Vue cool is the single file component approach. So we have this global heading component, and you'll see that we have our template, and then our JavaScript and our styles all in one place in this view file. And on the right-hand side here, what the app does, it's basically a code sandbox with the default like view hello world here. And I just added 3 instances of H3s. So the first one is just an H3, unadorned, the default element. And then we have a global component. So it's just an H3, and what the heading prop that gets passed in just gets rendered out. And then there's this scoped heading that we'll see in a second. So we're looking at the global one, and we just have our styles for that. The color's green, it's setting a border. So that's this right here that looks like that. And then also, because this is being treated as global, it is also applying to the just traditional H3 that's on the page. So you'll see that it's also green and has the border. If we look at the scoped heading component, it's essentially the same component with kind of one difference. So in the style section, we're saying style scoped. And if we add that scoped attribute, Vue knows to make these styles scoped to the component, unsurprisingly. So we're changing them and making the border bigger and red and blue and different font sizes and all that stuff. So as I think you probably can already guess, and given some of the stuff we talked about with specificity and the Cascade, we can all try to predict what happens if we remove scoped from this component. Takes a second to catch up, more than a second to catch up. But now, because of specificity here and some of the things we talked about, this rule, now that it's global, is applying to all of the previous H3s on the page, because this is the one that's coming last in the markup. But it's pretty cool to be able to have that level of control over how your CSS is applied, when it would be global versus when it's scoped to the component. So you probably have a decent idea of what slide's coming up next. Why can't we have both of these things? Why can't we have that level of control over our CSS? With the way that I approach building components, it would be great. So thanks again. And that's definitely the end of my talk. Looking at the chat, I can tell that no one is onto the fact that this is just a giant bit. But we still have more time. So let's dive in one last time and just dive in a little bit more. So this is scope in CSS with and without JavaScript. And CSS has global scope. So we talked about the Cascade, specificity, inheritance, methodologies like BEM. But a question that I ask myself thinking about this stuff, and you may be asking yourself at this point, is can regular CSS have component scope? So not really, kind of, again, because CSS by its nature is global. But there's a few other interesting things we can talk about. One is atomic or functional CSS. And I actually recently saw that in an article abbreviated as AFU CSS, which sounds like somebody being mad at CSS, which I thought was very amusing. So atomic CSS or functional CSS, if you're not familiar with it, it's the idea of using like these single purpose classes that are named based on what they do, their visual function. And it's immutable. So the CSS is not going to change. The classes aren't going to change. And this kind of shifts the control of styling and your visual control into markup from your CSS. So there's a couple of different approaches in the atomic world. One is static. So basically you have a pre-existing set of utility classes. You might have a little bit of control over some variables, colors, maybe your grid system, things like that. But for the most part, you just have a bunch of utility classes that you can use in your markup as you see fit. And there's also the kind of wild programmatic approach where, depending on what you write in your CSS, in your markup, CSS is generated based on what you're asking for in your markup, which is, again, kind of wild. But TAILWIND is a popular library here. So this GIF from their homepage actually kind of illustrates what it does pretty well. You've got these utility classes, and you can just write in your markup things like text large, text purple 500, W16, and you know, your content is going to change its style based on what you provide in your markup. It is they describe it as a utility-first framework for rapidly building custom designs. So from my perspective, it is you know, not for me, not how I want to write CSS. It kind of takes a lot of you know, my workflow and how I tend to use CSS. I can stop that guy for a second. But I have heard you know, more and more people using Tailwind and liking it, and there are definitely folks out there who love it. But the interesting thing, I think, from this for this conversation is just the fact that this is another approach out there that seems to be gaining some steam, where developers are really trying to kind of bend or override kind of the default behavior of CSS and some of its global nature. You know, it doesn't necessarily make you actually have component scope, but it gives you so much more control within the markup. So the fact that people are doing this and interested in approaches like this, I think are noteworthy given the CSS landscape. And as we have mentioned numerous times, CSS-in-JS can provide component scope. But the, you know, the counterpoint to what we just looked at, could CSS-in-JS be more like regular CSS? You know, as in, could it be done with like less JavaScript? And could it handle things globally? So first, kind of thinking about the global aspect of that. Another CSS-in-JS approach is CSS modules. And CSS modules is a little bit different from something like styled components that we looked at, in that it's not really a package. It's something that's handled by a bundler and a build process, usually Webpack. And it scopes your styles locally by default, but as we'll see in a second, can handle things globally as well. It also plays nicely with Sass or Webpack Sass Loader in this case, and you know, other things that are part of your build process. It also ships now with Create React App and Gatsby, so it's easy to experiment with and try out. Gatsby was actually the first time that I was kind of hands-on with this approach. And it also has a super snarky logo, as you see here, with modules overflowing its container. Haha. But just to look a little bit at how CSS modules works, we'll just look at a little side project I did a while back, static site about static sites in Gatsby. So we'll look at these card components, which really don't have anything all that complicated going on, just, you know, a heading, some text, links. So this is a Sass partial project card.module.scss, and at least in Gatsby, that module.scss extension is what lets Webpack know that this should be treated as a CSS module. And the actual styles here aren't super important, but the general structure is probably what we need to look at. So there's the kind of parent class, like the block of BEM project card. And then inside, there are some elements with some pretty generic class names like title and language and description here. So if we look at our React component, in this case, our project card.js, we can import project card.module.scss as styles. And what that gives us is a styles object that we can use in our JSX when we're rendering things. So you'll see when we get to this div here, there's the class name prop, and we can use styles.projectCard for the project card class, and styles.language, and so on. And if we do that and inspect our component, you know, it's kind of similar to what we looked at with styled components, but it's giving us that unique class name handled by the runtime. But it's a little bit more readable, and I think it's also somewhat configurable as well. But we have the component name and module, and then our kind of unique string appended to it as well. And that's what scopes it locally and prevents it from leaking out. So our friend is here saying, why don't we have both? And she's jumping the gun in this case a little bit, because CSS modules can also handle global CSS, or not, I guess, in this case. So it's also possible with the same component here. If we just have a project card.css Sass partial, we can just import that in our component. And if we import it like this, it becomes global. And so all those rules are applied globally. And then within our render method, we can use the class name prop, but just pass in the string of the class name. And the end result is going to look the same, but all those styles are globally and no longer scoped to the component. So this opens up some interesting possibilities, like cases where you have styles that need to be shared across templating engines. So this is based on kind of an ongoing project, so I'll just talk about it at a high level. But it's a progressively decoupled Drupal project that I'm currently working on. And we did find a situation where, so there's essentially an authenticated user portal that's handled by React, and then other portions of the site that are more traditionally Drupal. And we did find that there were a lot of global styles that we wanted to apply in both cases. So things like typography, spacing scale, stuff like that. So we were looking for a way that we could easily share that stuff and use it in kind of both developer contexts. So, Drupal uses Twig and has some of its own unique styles and components. React uses JSX, has some of its own stuff. And we're looking how we can handle the overlap. So what we ended up doing is essentially using CSS modules, in this case, allowed us to basically let each of the pieces of the stack to use those Sass partials as they see fit. So on the React side of things, we're importing everything in JavaScript, and it's a mix of global and component scope. So, the global things are being imported globally, and then other things at the component level. And there's also some project-specific CSS. But because both build processes are just using these Sass partials, on the Drupal side, we can do a more traditional Sass build. So we're creating one global CSS file that combines things from the shared design system, and then also things that are specific to Drupal. So we can actually just list out all of the Sass partials that we want to import in our main Sass file. So we can have our peanut butter in our chocolate in this case. And it's been working well on the project so far. So for people who have kind of come up at a certain age, they might have the concept of the separation of concerns that was drilled into their head. I know it was mine. The idea that JavaScript and CSS and HTML are kind of separate things that need to be isolated, but at the end of the day, work together. And taking this more component approach, the separation of concerns kind of changes a little bit. It's a little bit of a different view of it. And this is not an image that I created. I'm sure many have probably seen this before, but at the component level there, really, if you look at your button or your date picker or something, it's just encapsulating the CSS, JavaScript, and HTML that you need for that thing and to render that component. So, it's still a separation, but it's a different view on that. And I think, both can be valid. But the way that I've been building front-end components, more and more, I really tend to think of the separation at the component level. So could we have component scope with less JavaScript? All of the things that we've looked at still at the end of the day are CSS in JS. So this, got me thinking about the idea of like popular extensions becoming official. So in CSS, preprocessors have influenced new features in CSS. So CSS custom properties is a big one, which does a lot of things that Sass variables can do, with also some additional superpowers. And then nesting is starting to work its way into CSS as a whole as well. And then in the Drupal world, there's the idea of popular contrib projects finding their way into core, JSON API being a recent example of that. There's the the panels ecosystem, influencing layout builder, and even the new core admin and default themes are also starting out in contrib and making their way into core as well. But probably the best example of that is in JavaScript itself. So writing ES6 or any flavor of modern JavaScript, you're most likely using some sort of transpiler like Babel, so that you can write using new JavaScript methods and things like that. But it'll still be transpiled in such a way that it can be used on a particular target set of browsers. And so in general, what is happening there is that over time, more of the things that you used to have to be transpiled are actually becoming supported natively in the browser. And then what Babel can do continues to evolve. So it's keeping up with the newer things in JavaScript. And then again, over time, a lot of that stuff trickles down to native JavaScript as well. So, I wondered, could the same thing happen for scope in CSS? So there actually was an attempt at this a while back. The HTML scoped attribute was in the spec. And as you can see from this can I use screenshot, it was not widely adopted, very briefly in a time period of Firefox's life. But interestingly enough, it's that same scoped attribute that Vue has adopted as their way to dictate the CSS scope in a component. So, maybe as people continue to turn to this approach and want this level of control, maybe something like this, could be revived in CSS at large. Or alternatively, could something like web components and the shadow DOM be a solution for this? So the web components and things that use the shadow DOM scope CSS locally by default, but there's ways to also handle things globally as well. But it still requires writing a decent amount of JavaScript to create your web component. So, I don't know that necessarily allows you to have the control of scope with less JavaScript, but as web components increase their adoption, maybe this does become the way that people find this, component scope for CSS in, the native language. So, obviously I can't predict the future here. Only Yoda knows the future of CSS. But, again, I would love to be able to have that level of control with CSS all of the time, dictate when things should be global, and have certain things that are just only within the scope of a component. So pretty much wrapping up here. Also definitely want to plug the contribution day, the virtual contribution day on Saturday. So I'll definitely be around if you want to chat more about this stuff in Slack or on the internet or whatever. And also trying to work on some issues with the Olivero theme, which is really exciting and coming along. So definitely stay where you are and join for the contribution day. So thanks to everybody, and thanks to our friend Meme Girl here supporting me all the way along. I think we probably do have a couple of minutes for questions if people have questions, or we can continue the conversation virtually too.
So we have 15 more minutes in this room scheduled for questions, Brian. And awesome. We did have one early on. I've been monitoring it. Didn't want to interrupt your restarts of your talk. It was from Jamil. Sorry for mispronouncing that. How do you avoid redundant CSS code in that Vue approach? Are there imports for general purpose CSS files?
Yeah, there. I actually don't use Vue much myself, so I don't actually know what the typical convention is there within Vue. But because you can have that control over scope, you can certainly have, it might be a particular component, or maybe like the kind of app root component that imports CSS that's global. So, I don't know what the exact specific answer is there. I'm curious about that. I'll look it up. But because you have that control over scope, it's definitely possible.
Awesome. So anyone else have a question? Feel free to use the chat to communicate to us and we'll get that answered, or raise your hand. Or if somebody just wants to be brave and unmute themselves, hopefully that won't result in chaos. But yeah, the hand raising function. John? All right, let's unmute you. You're on the air, John.
Hey, Brian. John Mack here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Hey, John.
The one method you talked about with the really funky CSS names, is that a trend that you see coming up more, that the names would be, garbage to the human eye, but unique?
Yes, yeah, and it's pretty common within the CSS-in-JS options. So things like styled components and emotion and all of those libraries do take that approach. And it varies a little bit. Like when you looked at CSS modules, it's like a little bit more readable, but still has that string that makes it unique. So yeah, as CSS and JS continues to gain adoption, I think that will continue to become more of a thing, which I'm guessing, can be problematic, maybe from an analytics perspective.
Analytics, personalization, lots of downstream effects. Are they at least like consistently garbage, or like every time you compile, do they shake it up? Like if there's a...
Yeah, that's a good question. I would have to double check to know for sure, but I think because it is like a runtime that's bundled with your JavaScript, they're not even consistently garbage.
Good to know.
The one thing that I would say there, trying to think of ways around that, I believe it also would be possible to provide your own class names, even though they might not like actually either a class name or maybe like a prop in the component. So if you need something that really you're trying to like trigger based on your markup or some logic, you could still use that sort of stuff, but maybe it doesn't control styling. Kind of funky, but seems like it would be possible.
Yes.
I see another question from Tyler, who also gave a nice shot at TAILWIND before, I think. But does the Drupal and React setup where both are consuming the same Sass partials require some special considerations for how you author those partials? Not really. I can't really think of too many cases there. So the only thing that I could really think of that I've seen is there are some cool things you can do with Webpack as far as like exposing variables in your Sass to JavaScript. So we've done that with breakpoints. You can make your breakpoints from your Sass partials things that are just automatically JavaScript variables. I would guess that syntax would be a problem if you're like, if in another part of your build process, you're not using Webpack. But that's the only thing I can think of. In most other cases, it's pretty traditional Sass or CSS.
All right, well, anybody else have a question here? Don't be shy. This is your chance to pick Brian's brain while he's on the spot.
It's all good. I'm definitely around if questions come up or people just want to chat. And definitely thanks to everybody for being part of this virtual camp. It's super exciting.
It really is. All right, so a lot of thank yous coming in. Feel free to unmute yourself and give us some applause here. Let's take a second to do that.
Yay!
Wow, hey. Just like a real room.
Just like a real room. Vuvuzelas and everything.